Today, we are tackling a subject that is going to completely flip your understanding of history. When we think of history's most lethal warriors, our minds almost always jump straight to those cinematic finales, right? We picture them going out in this massive blaze of glory on the battlefield, swords raised high, fighting to the bitter end. But as we're going to see by looking directly at the historical record, history's deadliest fighters rarely met the ends we might imagine. Actually, their final chapters are usually twisted by irony, treachery, or honestly, just mundane circumstances.
Okay, let's dive into this, because that is the fundamental question we're asking today. How do you kill the unkillable? We're talking about individuals whose combat resumes are genuinely mind-boggling, fighters who survived hundreds of engagements, who waded through elite enemy formations, and who seemed literally immune to the blades and bullets of their peers. Just to give you a sense of the sheer scale of the lethality we're talking about here,
2 million. Yeah, you heard that right. Historians estimate that the legendary Shaka Zulu and his armies were responsible for up to 2 million deaths. He absolutely transformed warfare in southern Africa with the short stabbing spear and brutal close-quarters combat. Yet, the way a man with a kill count like that actually died, it is an incredible twist of irony. And that irony is exactly how we're going to structure our journey today.
So here's our roadmap for the Explainer. We've organized these legendary fighters not by when they lived, but by the fascinating nature of their demise. First up, live by the sword. Then, the ultimate betrayals. Next, the irony of peace. And finally, death cannot stop them.
all right, part 1. Live by the sword, defiant final stance.
So these are the warriors who actually fulfilled that classic trope we talked about, going out in a chaotic blaze of glory, taking as many of the enemy with them as humanly possible. Take the Roman veteran Lucius Siccius Dentatus, for example. This guy fought in 120 battles. He won 8 one-on-one duels. But a corrupt magistrate saw this 64-year-old as a threat and sent him on a totally fake scouting mission. Ambushed in a ravine, the old man fought back so fiercely he cut down 8 assassins. They literally had to scramble up the slopes and crush him with rocks from afar because they just couldn't beat him hand-to-hand. Then you have Spartacus, the guy who led the famous 73 BC slave revolt. He drilled slaves into an army that totally humiliated Rome for 2 years. Trapped finally by Crassus, Spartacus tried to hack a path straight through the lines to kill the Roman general himself, dropping 2 centurions before finally being swarmed. Rome's revenge? Absolutely brutal. They crucified 6,000 rebels to send a terrifying message.
But you know, maybe the most incredible defiant stand belongs to the Tlaxcalan warrior Tlahuicule. Captured by the Aztecs, Emperor Montezuma actually offered him his freedom. But for Tlahuicule, returning alive was a total disgrace. He freely chose a warrior's death. And just look at this staggering handicap they gave him. He was tethered by the ankle to a massive stone, handed a club edged with harmless feathers instead of razor-sharp obsidian, and set against wave after wave of elite eagle and jaguar warriors wielding real weapons. Even half-crippled and basically unarmed, he still killed 8 and wounded 20 of the empire's absolute finest before being overwhelmed and sacrificed on the altar.
And man, you just cannot talk about defiance without mentioning the Mapuche warrior Galvarino. Captured by the Spanish in Chile, the governor actually hacked off both his hands as a warning. But instead of submitting, Galvarino lashed knives to his stumps and charged right back into battle. Captured again, he delivered this absolutely chilling promise to his captors. "If you free me, I will tear you apart with my teeth." Whether he was hanged or thrown to war dogs, every single historical account agrees on one thing. He died without flinching. Moving on to part 2, the ultimate betrayals, killed from within. So what do you do when a warrior is practically invincible on the battlefield? Well, you outmaneuver them. Lu Bu was the most feared fighter of the dying Han dynasty. They called him the Flying General. But he was a serial traitor. When he was besieged and starving, his own exhausted officers tied him up in his sleep. His reputation finally caught up with him, and he was executed. Then there's Guan Yu, the legendary giant of the Three Kingdoms era. This is a guy who once charged an entire army just to decapitate a general. But he was felled by overreach. He pushed way too far into enemy territory. A rival quietly seized his bases behind him, and his unsupplied army just melted away, leading to his capture and beheading.
And that brings us back to Shaka Zulu. After his mother died, his grief curdled into this really deep derangement. He ordered a national mourning so severe that he banned crops and executed thousands of people who didn't cry convincingly enough. To save the nation, his own half-brothers stabbed him to death in his royal homestead. As he lay bleeding, he taunted them with this haunting prophecy, that white men already crossing the sea would swallow the land whole. His body was unceremoniously dumped in a grain pit, and sadly, his eerie dying words proved tragically accurate. Next up is part 3, the irony of peace. The anticlimax.
This is perhaps the greatest contrast we'll see today. Warriors who forged their names in blood, meeting remarkably mundane ends. Just look at the sheer contrast here. Khalid ibn al-Walid, known as the Sword of Allah, won roughly 100 engagements and shattered 2 empires. He survived all of that, only to die of illness in his bed. He actually wept at the end. His body was just a roadmap of scars, and he was devastated that he had chased a martyr's death in battle his whole life but was ultimately denied it. Conversely, you have William Marshall, an Anglo-Norman knight who was undefeated in something like 500 brutal tournaments and countless wars. He achieved the rarest possible death for his trade. He died peacefully in bed at an old age, fulfilling his vows as a Knight Templar.
And we see this exact same irony carrying right into the brutal, mechanized conflicts of the 20th century. Just look at the staggering, highly documented efficiency. You've got Simo Häyhä, the Finnish sniper with over 500 kills in deep snow. Ludmila Pavlichenko, the Soviet history student who literally walked out of a lecture hall and racked up 309 confirmed sniper kills. And Alvin C. York, who practically neutralized an entire German machine gun flank single-handedly in World War I. These individuals survived the absolute meat grinders of modern war.
And this brilliantly illustrates our point. Simo Häyhä, feared as the White Death, was actually hit by an explosive Soviet bullet that tore away his jaw. He slipped into a coma, woke up the very day the Winter War ended, and went on to live a remarkably long, quiet life. It is almost unbelievable, but the deadliest sniper in history passed away peacefully as a hunter and dog breeder at the age of 96 in the year 2002.
It turns out, disease and old age accomplished what whole armies and master swordsmen never could. Skanderbeg personally killed around 3,000 Ottomans, holding the empire at bay for 25 years, but he was taken out by a single mosquito bite, dying of malaria. Pir Gerlofsdonia, the giant Frisian pirate who hunted down the mercenaries who burned his farm, eventually just laid down his massive sword and died of natural causes. And even the legendary Miyamoto Musashi, undefeated in over 60 duels in Japan, just retired to a cave to write his famous treatise on strategy. He passed away from what was almost certainly cancer, seated upright with his sword resting right beside him.
But perhaps the most anticlimactic end of all belongs to Richard the Lionheart. Here was a fearless crusader king who absolutely lived for the battlefield. So how did he die? Well, while strolling the perimeter of a trivial little siege over a petty dispute about some buried treasure, he was admiring the nerve of a lone defender shooting at him. That defender, who was said to be just a boy, hit him in the shoulder with a crossbow bolt. A clumsy surgeon totally butchered the extraction, gangrene set in, and the mighty king died days later, slain by a boy and a botched medical procedure. Just wild.
Finally, Part 4. Death cannot stop them. Myths and corpses.
For a select few warriors, death wasn't an ending at all. Their stories, their artifacts, or incredibly, even their physical corpses continued to wage war long after they stopped breathing. The Icelandic berserker Eagle Skallagrimsson died an old, frail man, but centuries later, his exhumed skull was found to be so thick and unnaturally ridged that a swung axe could barely leave a white scratch on it. When Skanderbeg died, the Ottomans who finally took his city actually dug up his grave, broke his bones into pieces, and set the fragments in silver and gold to wear as amulets. They were utterly convinced his legendary courage would pass into them. And Guan Yu, who we mentioned earlier was betrayed and beheaded, literally ascended to myth. Today he is widely worshipped as the Chinese god of war.
Then there's the Castilian warlord El Cid, who died of natural causes inside the besieged city of Valencia. Fearing the city would fall without his leadership, his wife had his body embalmed, dressed in armor, strapped upright onto his warhorse with his sword tied to his hand, and sent out to lead his troops. The besieging Moors saw the dead El Cid apparently riding out to fight them once more, panicked entirely, and literally fled the field.
Or take the unforgettable final revenge of the Indian king Prithviraj Chauhan. Captured and blinded with red-hot irons, he was forced to perform archery for a sultan's amusement. But his loyal court poet recited a single, secretly coded verse describing the exact distance and direction of the sultan. Guided purely by sound, the blind king loosed one single arrow and struck the sultan dead. Now, while historians debate the exact truth of this event, it is an arrow shot that India has never, ever forgotten.
This theme of supernatural endurance continues with Maori chief Hangi Hika. He totally transformed warfare in New Zealand with muskets. In 1821, chainmail saved his life, but in 1827, a bullet went clean through his chest, puncturing his lung.
Now, he didn't die immediately. He lived another 14 months with a literal open wound. People said they could hear the wind whistling through the hole in his chest every single time he breathed, until he finally succumbed in 1828.
We're going to conclude the explainer with Lapu-Lapu, the Philippine chief who led his warriors into the surf and personally fought and killed the famous explorer Ferdinand Magellan in brutal close combat. It was a massive, celebrated victory. But after securing his place in history, Lapu-Lapu just vanishes. No surviving account agrees on how, when, or where he died. It leaves us with a lingering historical enigma. And I want to leave you with this final thought. When a warrior's deeds are etched into history in blood and bronze, how does it shape our understanding of heroes when their final chapters simply vanish into thin air? Think about that for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.